I'm sort of like a personal trainer for horses, and I get them ready like any professional athlete you would prepare for an event. So my job today as trainer, my role is I brought It's a G-Man here to the races, and his owner couldn't be here today. He lives in New York. But the jockey is someone I employ. He's like a race car driver. He doesn't drive that race car every day. He's a good tactician. This is called steeplechase racing, and steeplechasing is an umbrella term for two different kinds of racing here in the United States, hurdle racing and timber racing. And the hurdle races they're jumping brush fences, a little more forgiving, shorter distance, they carry less weight over the jumps. And then timber racing, or sort of the wooden fences that are kind of more substantial, and they have to be better jumpers, and it's a longer race, and they carry more weight.
How does it feel to actually make the jump? Is it exhilarating? Is it scary? How does it feel?
It's a pretty cool feeling. They're going anywhere from 20 to 30 miles an hour, roughly, in a race.
Yeah.
It is exhilarating. Personally, I've broken a few bones, yes.
It goes with the territory.
It goes with the territory. It's a labor of love, for sure. I was a horse-crazy little girl, and it's just become a way of life for me.
It's your passion.
It is my passion. It's a life passion, absolutely.
Regina, if you buy a horse for this type of racing, give me a range of what you'd pay.
Well, Brandon, you could be anywhere from $2,000 from a horse that you're going to buy that's a little less experienced and you're going to turn it into a nicer horse, to an accomplished horse that's well-bred for, people go to Europe and buy them there where they're specifically bred for steeplechasing for about $100,000.
Wow. So what other costs are there besides the cost of the horse?
Well, their daily training and maintenance isn't cheap. You're going to pay $50 to $80 a day, probably.
To train it?
To have it trained.
And what about housing it?
The trainer typically covers housing, feed, and the additional expenses are the blacksmith, the farrier taking care of their feet, and the veterinarian, entry fees, shipping, stuff like that.
The equipment that goes into it?
Saddle, a bridle, and anything you're going to need to ride them every day. You've probably got about $600 or $800 of tack on them.
They're off and running, coming strong, boost the lead on the
This is a typical racing shoe. Costs about $120 to have the blacksmith put these light little aluminum shoes on your horse.
And how long does it last?
5 weeks, about 5 weeks. These are their Nikes.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. About the same price too.
Yeah.
But they have 4 feet, not 2.
Twice as expensive.
Exactly.
If the horses win, is it enough to cover their costs?
You should just expect to lose money, basically, in this sport. If you have a really good horse, it'll pay for itself. And if you have a really special horse, you'll make money.